Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to a special online event today called Discovering the Psychology of the Future, New Approaches for Self-Exploration and Healing. My name is Stephen Dinan. I'm the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, and I'm really thrilled to be hosting today's program with one of my most important mentors and teachers over the years. His name is Stanislav Grof. He's an internationally renowned psychiatrist and one of the founders of the field of transpersonal psychology. He's spent over 50 years researching the frontiers of our psyche, especially through non-ordinary states of consciousness for the purposes of exploration, healing, and growth. He's authored many groundbreaking books: Psychology of the Future, LSD Psychotherapy, Beyond the Brain, Cosmic Game, on, including one with his past wife, Christina Grof, on holotropic breathwork, and Stormy Search for the Self and Spiritual Emergency. So 150 scholarly articles, just made a massive contribution to the whole understanding of psychology, spiritual growth and development, and non-ordinary states, and really are the entire psyche, or the entire cosmos as well. So Stan, what a pleasure and honor it is to be bringing you to our Shift Network. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for inviting me to your program. I'm very excited about it for several reasons. One is that we know each other, personally from the time that you were in our training. I know that you know my material well, and I also know from the program that you know the whole field. And it's always great to have a very knowledgeable and sympathetic interviewer. I'm also aware of the quality of the listeners to your program, that they are very open-minded audiences, and it's a special pleasure to present them the material that still in academic circles remains controversial. So it's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you, Stan. So I want to let everyone know that we'll have this hour with Stan, but we also have a chance to go much, much deeper into this with a new groundbreaking program called Psychology of the Future, exploring the leading edge of consciousness healing and self-discovery. This is something I've been dreaming about adding to the Shift Network programming roster for several years now, ever since the beginning, since Stan had such a formative influence on me and my own understanding of reality and awakening and consciousness and evolution. And so I want to share just a little bit more on a personal level. Stan is really somebody who not only has a vast intellect and a really almost encyclopedic knowledge of human development and psychology and mythology and all sorts of things, but he also has a vast heart, and he really gets in there and holds people and through their own growth and healing and development in a way that's very precious and beautiful. And I feel very blessed personally by the ways that Stan touched and worked with me over the years when I was training in holotropic breathwork and in the Grof holotropic breathwork training. So I really couldn't imagine somebody who's better at illuminating the new frontiers of psychology and what the new potential is for our growth and development than Stan, who really marries that deep philosophical understanding with the real wisdom and loving presence of knowing how to make a real difference in people's lives. So, Stan, let's share a little bit about the background. What brought you in beyond the conventional paradigm of psychology? So you started off a traditional psychiatrist and really began to see that there was something much more that was needed for us to really realize our full potential.
Well, my original ambition in my adolescence and post-adolescence was to work in animated movies. I was a fan as a child of Walt Disney's, and then an Czech artist who was winning many awards for his animated movies. And then it was reading Freud's introductory lecture to psychoanalysis that just changed this practically overnight, and I decided to enroll in the medical school and become a psychoanalyst. Started attending groups led by the only Czech psychoanalyst which survived the Second World War, because most of the psychoanalysts were Jewish. They had to leave, or they ended up in gas chambers. So I was attending these seminars, and then later I had 7 years of personal psychoanalysis. And as I was getting deeper into psychoanalysis, and then later particularly seeing the clinical applications, I was really getting very disappointed. At first, not with the theory. The theory still remained very exciting for me, but I was aware of the time that it takes, the energy, the money, and I was aware of the fact that the results are not exactly breathtaking. So I got to the point where I started regretting that I chose that discipline, and I was like nostalgically looking back to the animated movies. And then something interesting happened, that the psychiatric department of the clinic in Prague received a supply of LSD from Sandoz pharmaceutical companies. And it came with a letter explaining what that was, talking about Albert Hofmann, the ergot chemist, discovering the psychedelic effects of this amazing substance when he actually accidentally intoxicated himself. And so they were now sending these samples because a pilot study showed that this might be interesting for psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, students, and so on. And so they asked us if we would like to work with the substance. And so I was very excited. I was so disappointed at that point with psychoanalysis, but also psychiatry, which I had to get involved in. And this was the era of really medieval approaches, the electroshocks and insulin comas and straitjackets and so on. So this was exciting for me, and I became one of the early volunteers. And I had an experience of cosmic consciousness. It's unbelievably powerful because the LSD was combined also with something that my preceptor was interested in, which was exposure to very powerful stroboscopic light. He was studying if the frequencies of the stroboscopic light can change the brain waves. So I got this very powerful combination. I was catapulted out of my body. I have the feeling of being completely extinguished, but also becoming all there was. And for a while I was in the astronomical universe where things were happening for which I didn't even have names at the time. But later I read about the Big Bang and the black holes and white holes and wormholes. So this was something in that category. And what was important for me, that coming down from that experience, I ended up in a situation where I, found the planet again. I found the clinic. I found my body. But for a while, my consciousness was kind of circling around my body, and I was trying to align those two, my body and my consciousness. And it became just absolutely clear to me that what they taught me at the university, that consciousness is a product of the brain or the neurophysiological processes in the neurons, simply was a nonsense, that consciousness was a cosmic phenomenon and that we somehow partake or participate in it, but certainly don't produce it in our brain. And so I was very impressed. Suddenly there was a new excitement about psychiatry, and the study of these states became my passion, my vocation, my profession. So this was 60 years ago, and I haven't really done since then anything that would not be in one way or another related to non-ordinary states of consciousness. And I should say a very specific subgroup for which psychiatry did not have a name until I made one. I call them holotropic. Holos means whole, trepo, trepein, moving in the direction of something. So these are states, healing, transformative, I believe evolutionary, and also heuristic potential, HEUR. That means if we experience them and work with them, run across many, many phenomena for which current psychiatry, psychology simply does not have a name. And these are really paradigm breaking. They're asking for a completely new psychology and psychiatry. So this, in a nutshell, is how I got into this field.
Mm. Well, I've experienced the power myself so many times of holotropic breath work and the power of non-ordinary states of consciousness. And maybe if you can share a little bit why the accessing non-ordinary states of consciousness is so central to a more accelerated path of growth and healing and development from your perspective.
Well, the first thing is that they show you that the human psyche is infinitely larger than mainstream psychiatry and psychology ever dreamt of. You know, we have a model which is very narrow, very, painfully superficial. We inherited Freud's idea that the newborn is a tabula rasa. There's nothing that precedes biological birth that's of any interest for psychiatry, for psychology. The birth, those hours in the birth canal, are not considered psychotrauma. Our, interest starts with bonding, child looking into the mother's eye, and then nursing and toilet training, and the interpersonal dynamics in the family. Now, if you work with non-ordinary states, you discover that the psyche is enormous. I mean, it's more like was described in the great philosophies of the East, Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, also in Sufism, and these are places where the Christian mystics go. So that's one major difference. And then you also discover that the roots of emotional, psychosomatic, and even interpersonal problems go much farther than childhood and infancy. There are deeper roots that reach to what I call the perinatal matrices, material, emotions, physical feelings that are related to the consecutive stages of birth, and then even deeper into a realm that we call now transpersonal. That means past life experiences, archetypal experiences, even what we call phylogenetic, going to ancestral memories, to memories of animal ancestors and so on. And then what Jung called archetypal, we can experience mythological figures and mythological domains from any culture that has ever existed, whether or not we know something about that culture intellectually. So this kind of understanding of the psyche gives us much deeper understanding of what the emotional and psychosomatic problems are, and also how they have to be treated effectively. In other words, it's not enough to deal with the postnatal biographical level. We need to go for those roots that are in birth and that are in the transpersonal level, and that cannot be done by talking. We need powerful experiential methods, whether it's psychedelic or some shamanic methods, or the different ways of working with breaths, the way holotropic breathwork operates that Christina and I developed at SLN. So we need a bigger cartography to be effective in self-exploration and in healing, and we also need more powerful tools that can reach those levels.
One thing
in verbal therapy, we can't even reach the pre-verbal levels of postnatal biography, let alone the roots which are perinatal or transpersonal.
Mm. One of your concepts that I found really helpful over the years is the coex system. So it's sort of seeing that it's almost a layer cake of experiences that build on earlier layers, and if we don't get to those earlier layers, or roots as you're calling, then we're going to tend to recreate the same patterns and experiences on the surface. So I wonder if you could share a little bit about how that works, where we have a whole many layers of a cake.
Yeah, that was another very, very interesting, very important observation, that the unconscious contents are not distributed in a way that they create kind of a discontinuous mosaic, but they actually for sort of dynamic multi-level constellations. So I started talking about them as coexistence, systems of condensed experience, where several of the layers could be postnatal. The deeper layers would be perinatal, would be linked to the birth process, and then the deepest levels of the of the coex systems would go into the transpersonal, to the karmic or the archetypal. And what connects these layers is that they share a certain emotional quality and also physical symptoms. So, for example, you can have a choking coex underlying a psychogenic asthma, where let's say the most recent level would be situation of near drowning when you were 7 years old, then a series of episodes where you're being strangled by your older sibling, and then maybe another deeper layer, whooping cough or diphtheria when you were choking because of that disease. And then it's anchored in a certain aspect of birth, which involve choking, and then the deepest level could go to a past life experience of being hanged or being strangled in circumstances that you would identify as something coming from a previous lifetime. It's happening in another century, in another country. And so then the work with the coex systems, is extremely important, not just for understanding the dynamics of these kinds of disorders, but also dealing with them. In other words, working with holotropic states, you have to allow yourself to go to all the levels that contribute to the symptomatology. You can have many other coexes. You can have a coex which has to do with the role of a victim, of a martyr, that also goes through your biography to what I call the second matrix, which is the situation in the womb where the uterus is contracting, but the cervix is not open, so I kind of imprisoned in a no-exit situation. And then can be actual past life memories of prisons or torture chamber or locked ward or concentration camp and so on. So this is a very important concept. Then also turned out to be extremely important bridge to a sort of fascinating complement, which turns out to be archetypal astrology. So I have been now working for over 30 years with Rick Tarnas, who's a brilliant astrologer. And there, both the perinatal matrices and the coex systems tend to be, important bridges. So that archetypal astrology turns out to be, what I call Rosetta Stone for consciousness research. It's the only thing, transit astrology is the only thing that seems to predict what kind of experiences we will have at a particular time if we take psychedelics or if we do holotropic breathwork or if we are experiencing spiritual emergency. I don't know any other system that can do it. Certainly not the current logical tests like Rorschach, TNT, MMPI, you name it.
Stan, well, there's so many areas that we could go into in what you're opening up this terrain, and you touched upon the second matrix of the birth experiences, and that's really become one of your signature contributions in the larger world, is to understand the different stages of the birth process and how formative they are on our developing psyche and also future psychopathology, as well as what we are able to accomplish in our lives. So I wonder if you just share a little bit, kind of give a brief overview of those different stages of the birth process and how formative they are for our later development.
Well, I came into the work with psychedelics equipped basically with traditional medical training and Freudian psychoanalysis. And you see, none of these recognizes the importance of birth. In psychiatry, you hear that there cannot be memory of birth because the cortex is not mature enough. It's not myelinized, as it is called. The neurons don't have the fatty protective sheets that the adult brain has. And that's given as a kind of authoritative reason why there couldn't possibly be, consciousness and memory of birth. And Freud said the newborn is a tabula rasa, is a clean slate. There's nothing that precedes birth that is of any interest for psychology, including birth itself. There was a very brief period when Freud considered that maybe anxiety might have its prototype in the birth canal, but he moved away from that. So it was a struggle for me when we started working with LSD with clients, and also in my own experiences, to realize that there is a very powerful record of birth, of all the hours that we spent in the birth canal, with all the emotions and the difficult physical feelings, and that is actually an important reservoir of material for emotional disorders, psychosomatic disorders, and so on. And then I noticed that as we were regressing into childhood, that the experiences pertaining to birth were appearing in 4 constellations of emotions, physical feelings, and also specific connections to the next level, to the transpersonal unconscious, as Jung called it, archetypal or historical. And so I started talking about them as basic perinatal matrices, or BPM, and they were specifically linked to the 4 consecutive stages of birth. So the first matrix were the experiences when we are still in the womb, in an advanced stage of pregnancy, before the onset of delivery, first chemical and then mechanical with the contractions. Then the second matrix is the stage of birth where the uterus is now periodically contracting, but the cervix is not open. So we get into a kind of no exit, desperate, hopeless situation. And then after the cervix opens, that would be the third matrix, where we still struggle, but it's not hopeless. We have a sense of direction. We have a sense that if we struggle, there's a way we can sort of get out of that situation. And then the fourth matrix is then the actual emergence from the birth canal, head first or feet first. It depends on, the mechanics of the delivery. So each of those matrices, is linked with specific symbolism. A lot of it drawn from the collective unconscious. It's linked with specific emotions, specific physical feelings, and has also specific connections with different forms of what we call psychopathology, emotional psychosomatic disorders. So let's say something like claustrophobia would be on the perinatal level associated with the situation when the uterus starts closing in. Everything starts sort of closing in, and we are afraid that we are going to get trapped. The second matrix, the kind of the hopeless situation, that underlies, serious forms of depression, when we have that sense of hopelessness about ourselves, about our situation. We feel we are stuck, there is no way out. And then, let's say, the third matrix is very closely related to violence. People who have, violent nature, can experience violent impulses. The third matrix is also very interesting because the choking in that stage generates powerful sexual arousal. It links our early experience with that energy to very unpleasant circumstances where we inflict pain on another organism inflicts pain on us, we are scared, we experience all kinds of unpleasant feelings, we cannot breathe, and then later we encounter all kinds of forms of biological material that could be from blood to urine or even feces in some circumstances. The basis of being called psychopathia sexualis, different deviations, variations, perversions, and so on. And there is also during the transition from 3 to 4. Sometimes, if it's not completed, you can see manic manifestations. So that's specific connections between these matrices and different forms of psychopathology that gives you completely new understanding where depressions are coming from, why people want to commit suicide, why are they attracted to specific types of suicide. All these things that current psychiatry really cannot explain.
It's an amazing body of work, and it just opened up so much understanding, not just of psychopathology, but also some of the collective phenomena. And I know you've applied it to looking at the language used by oppressive dictators will often appeal to these very core drivers in our psyche, and by using language that evokes the second matrix, it can kind of lead people into an intense fear state and make them more malleable. It's really amazing, all of the different repercussions of the four matrices. So in terms of being able to work with these areas, so you've talked about the power of non-ordinary states, and another concept I'd love for you to share a bit about and how it connects here is the concept of the inner healer. Since the methods that you've developed really aren't as much just about like saying, okay, I want to have this specific experience and I'm going to go after this route. It's like it's more, there's more trust involved and more opening to a deeper wisdom unfolding within us. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about the role of the inner healer in exploring this terrain.
Yeah, this addresses another serious problem in psychiatry, specifically psychotherapy, that we have enormous number of schools, and the problem is that they don't agree with each other on some very fundamental issues, like what are the major motivating forces in the psyche? Is it sexuality, the way Freud was thinking about it? Is it our inferiority feelings that we're trying to overcompensate, as you find it in Adlerian psychiatry? Is it that society doesn't allow us to have full sexual experience, and libido is jamming the way Wilhelm Reich? Is it in culture the way Karen Horney talked about it, and so on? So each of those schools gives you another answer. Also sees differently problems such as why symptoms develop, what they mean, how do you interpret them, and then they differ very significantly in the strategy, in the technique, in the method that you're using. So if you have a problem, you can flip a coin and choose a school, and each gives you a different interpretation, different understanding what's wrong with you, and you will be asked to do something very different, and it will be seen as the scientific way of dealing with this. Now, this is a big problem. We don't have 50 schools of chemistry where the different schools would argue what happens when two substances come into a test tube. And we are very offended when people think that we are not a very scientific discipline, psychiatry. So what is now the alternative that holotropic states bring? It's very interesting. When you get into a holotropic state, it seems to function like a radar, that it finds in your unconscious contents which have very strong emotional charge, but also are in a certain position to the threshold of the consciousness, which means that they are ready to emerge. If you lower the defenses, they emerge and are available for processing on that particular day. You have many other, important contents in your unconscious, also very strongly charged, but they are not quite close to consciousness. They will have to wait session 2, 3 sessions before they become ready to emerge. So the choice of what you're going to be working on is really happening through the inner dynamics. It identifies what the problems are, but you also mobilize inner healing intelligence, self-healing intelligence, that will then present this material in a certain specific order. And very frequently you find out that the problems are very different than what you thought. Or even as a therapist, you might have an idea what the issues are in a patient, where they probably go, and suddenly something completely different happens, and you find out that the inner intelligence, the inner wisdom was far beyond anything that you could come up with your intellect. So one thing we are teaching people as a preparation for the session is to let go of any preconceptions, let go of any plans for the session, what they want to experience, what they would rather like to avoid, so that they go into the session with what the Zen Buddhists call the beginner's mind, as if you knew nothing about this process, just being there with full attention. The Vipassana form of attention is ideal. We did about over 30 retreats, 7-day retreats with Jack Cornfield, combining Vipassana meditation with the breath work. So that attitude is ideal. So you are there with full attention, you experience things fully, and let them go. So you're always prepared for the next experience to come. And you'll find that this by far is the most effective way of healing yourself, rather than bring concepts and ideas of strategies. Mm-hmm. I was taught when I was doing psychoanalysis that it's how interpretation is important, not only to make the right interpretation, but also proper timing. You can have the right interpretation, but it's premature and so on. And then I was taught to use things like strategic silence when you don't respond to people. There's no comparison to the power of the self-healing intelligence. And the problem again is that each school would teach you some different gimmicks how you work with this material. So if the experts don't agree, then why don't you trust your own inner intelligence?
Yeah, well, I think that this is one of the most revolutionary aspects of your work, is it really puts the locus of healing within rather than on the expert on the outside, and that it relates in different ways to the dream work, where we're really kind of asking for messages from our soul, and there's sort of a natural unfolding of our psyche. And it's ultimately very empowering because it sees this much deeper intelligence within each of us, that even if we identify as being kind of hurt or dysfunctional in some way, that there is this deeper wisdom that is inside of us that is just seeking to unwind and find expression. It's really it's our divine impulse, divine evolutionary impulse within us.
You find references to this in psychoanalytic history. One is Freud was talking about the dream work, the idea that we have very disturbing emotions, mostly sexual, in the unconscious, and when we go to sleep, the sensor is weakened, and so they would emerge into consciousness and disturb our sleep. So the dream work camouflages that material, makes it into something else, so that it fools the sensor. And then as a result of it, the work with dreams is via regia, is the royal way to the unconscious, because if the material were not important, it simply would not become a dream. So in a very similar way, in the holotropic states, it would not emerge if it were not emotionally important. And Jung had a similar idea when he moved from a kind of more Freudian type of analysis to what he called active imagination. He didn't want to work with dreams from the past. Freud sometimes worked with dreams that were 20 years old. Somebody told him a dream in a train and so on. But Jung wanted to see the material emerging from the unconscious in statu nascendi, as it is called, in the moment when it is emerging. So he would, instead of asking for the dream and analyzing it, he would ask the patient to lie down on the couch and go back into the dream so that he could see how the material emerges in the unconscious. And he had said something very similar, that in this situation, what happens that those contents in the psyche that are important emotionally and are in a certain position to the threshold of consciousness would automatically emerge, and you can work with them. Fritz Perls had something similar. You don't want to work with history, you work with the here and now. What the material that you see now.
Yeah, it's a very powerful concept, and I can see how the lineages evolved over time, and that is intrinsic to the psychology of the future that we have, that we really learn to respect and honor that unfolding. Love for you to connect that also in with the body. One of the things that was so powerful for me in studying and eventually facilitating holotropic breathwork was the recognition that so much of the unfolding of these old patterns in the past needed to find expression and movement through the body in order to really come to resolution, and that body work was really important for this. Not always, but that it was there as a mechanism. So I'll for you to share a little bit about the interface between the psyche and the body, and how you've seen that expressed through breath work.
Again, that's a very important difference from traditional psychoanalysis, but was already a significant part of the experiential therapies in the 60s, and the recognition that the emotional material and the physical material are closely related. Now, in traditional psychoanalysis, for example, the way it was done with me, the analyst didn't want to know anything about the body. My analyst actually didn't shake hands with me for the seven years that I was in psychoanalysis, because he was afraid that it would destroy the countertransference situation. Now, the holotropic states activate both the emotional side and the physical side, but they do also something different. They link it to spirituality. So it engages the body, the psyche, the emotions, and also the spiritual dimension. And this is what ancient cultures and native cultures thought about breath itself, that breath is this amazing physiological function that connects the external world, the air, with our body, with the lungs. It activates the psyche and can take us all the way to the spiritual domain. Yeah, actually in many cultures, ancient cultures, native cultures, there's the concept that breath is a very, very important function that connects the external world, which means air, our lungs, our body, then creates a psychological response, the psyche, but also can take us all the way to the spiritual domain. And it's reflected in the language which is being used, like prana in the yogic tradition means air, breath, but also the cosmic creative essence. The same ki in Japan and chi in China. The same, three different meanings. Pneuma or pneuma in the Gnostic tradition. Ha in the Polynesian tradition, known as aloha, the presence of the living breath, or in the term hauli, which is absence of living breath. But they started using for foreigners since the time that ruach in the Hebrew tradition, and actually in Latin we have spiritus, which is spirit and also breath, and strangely enough also alcohol. So this is something that has been known in cultures. The healing never involved just the psyche the way it has in most of the psychoanalytic schools where you do verbal therapy.
So if you look, for example, at the rituals of the Kalahari Bushmen in Africa that they do for healing and also spiritual opening, it looks very much like some of our more dynamic workshops can look. People have powerful emotions, they have powerful physical reactions, they also support each other in these rituals. Something very similar you find in what's called Umbanda, the syncretistic religion in the Caribbean or in Brazil. Again, the physical and the emotional and the spiritual are really all present in these kinds of contexts.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about the repercussions of this work and insights for the, just different mental health professionals. So how do you really see the whole mental health profession evolving more as we integrate more of these methods?
Well, I started recently giving talks which are called Proposal for a Radical Revision of Psychiatry, Psychology, and Psychotherapy. It's responding to the situation that if you work with holotropic states, you will see many phenomena for which current psychiatry psychology does not have any understanding. It's called, if anything, it's called anomalous phenomena. But we have many, many of them coming not just from psychedelic work, from holotropic breath work, but from near-death experiences, from parapsychology, from UFO phenomena, and so on. And I read a very interesting definition of anomalous phenomena, which is if you have a lot of anomalous phenomena, it suggests that it is what gets left after applying a bad hypothesis. So if you have a lot of anomalous phenomena, it's a call for some kind of radical paradigm shift. And I believe that we are now between paradigms where the old paradigm in science is not functioning anymore. There are too many anomalies, too many mysteries, from quantum relativistic physics, cosmology to transpersonal psychology. And that we really need a new paradigm, but this is something that takes a long time. Like the shift from geocentric system to heliocentric system took over 100 years. And the resistance was not just in the church, but also in the academic circles. So what you have, if you have a paradigm, the way Kuhn described it, that the academic community tends to frequently confuse it with reality. This is again something that Gregory Bateson and people like Alfred Korzybski pointed out as confusion of the map and the territory. They don't think about it as the best possible formulation and integration of the experiences we have available and observations we have available, but they start seeing it as an accurate and definitive description of reality itself. So Gregory Bateson used to say, if scientists make mistakes like this, it might happen that they come to a restaurant and they eat the menu instead of the dinner. So the major transition between paradigms, and some of the in psychology, for example, the changes that are needed, vast expansion of what we think the psyche is, the dimensions of the psyche, the depths, the roots of the emotional problems, this range of therapeutic possibilities, the fact that we don't really recognize the relevance and importance of spirituality in materialistic science. If this universe is a history of developing matter, and life, consciousness, and intelligence come as basically a fluke, in an insignificant part of the universe after billions of years of evolution of matter, which is inert, which is blind, which is reactive, and so on. Then if somebody says spirit, said, what do you mean by spirit? Haven't you done your study? Don't you know what materialistic science discovered about the universe? So we would have to incorporate spirituality as a legitimate and very critical dimension in the psyche and in the universal scheme of things. We would have to incorporate the concept of the inner healing intelligence as compared to, trying to fix the psyche with some methodology that is based on attempted rational understanding and so on. So this is a major transitional period that can take a very long time. But I'm not speaking for myself. Christina and I started the International Transpersonal Association. There's now having 20 of these international conferences. There's a stellar cast of people who have the best credentials, including David Bohm, Rupert Sheldrake, Richard Capra, Ilya Prigozhin, and so on. Nobel Prize winning people who subscribe to this new paradigm, and yet the professional circles are very reluctant to take transpersonal psychology seriously. Because you cannot add to the existing worldview, you have to change it radically.
Well, I think this is a great time to transition to talking about your upcoming program that we mentioned earlier. First of all, we're just so excited and blessed that you're going to be doing the Psychology of the Future program for the Shift Network. It's really going to be a groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting, mind-expanding, soul-deepening adventure that really explores much more than just the terrain we've covered here today. It's like all these different dimensions of how to open up to a new paradigm of the possible in psychology, and really offer some of the best of this 50 years of research at the frontiers that Stan has done, synthesized into 7 modules of key insights and shifts that are required to open to this new paradigm. So it's the kind of program that's it should be really mandatory almost for new paradigms of psychology and people who work in healing professions, but it's also very, very accessible to the committed layperson who's really on a path of spiritual growth and understanding. I personally can say that Stan's teachings have rewired my own understanding of my psyche and growth and evolution and universe and the whole universe of possibilities, probably more than anyone else's. So it links to very powerful personal transformation methodologies. It has an impact in how we see the world and our role in it, see our evolution, really understand violence and greed in the collective. So it's a whole lens for seeing reality that opens up new possibilities. So Stan, I'd love for you to just give a little bit of a tour of what's on offer. Just share a little bit about what's in each module.
So in the first module, I would like to talk about the radical revision that is necessary in psychology and psychotherapy. Basically, sum up the observations from what is now 60 years of consciousness research. In the second teleseminar, I would like to take people through a visionary journey through the new cartography, the kind of paintings that people create when they have birth experiences and the opening into the transpersonal domain. Basically, pictorial documentation of the areas which are not recognized by current psychology and psychiatry. In the third teleseminar, I would like to look at the deep roots of human violence and greed. That it's not just our biological nature or impact of what happened to us in childhood, but there are deeper roots that come from the birth trauma, and even deeper roots that come from the archetypal level. And then also our attempts to transform somehow these violent impulses and that insatiable greed that can manifest in human beings. We need more than talking. Again, we need some transformative methodology, whether it's psychedelics or some powerful experiential therapies or shamanic methods to reach and transform those sources of aggression. Then in the next one, I would like to show how our understanding of emotional and psychosomatic disorders changes if we expand the cartography by including these 2 new domains, the perinatal, the transversal, how suddenly depression appears in a new light. You understand much more about why people want to commit suicide and the error that is involved in choosing suicide as a way out of your problems. Why people choose different types of suicide. Why is suicide linked also with violence and with spirituality, the way we see it in this new fundamentalist Islam, with the suicidal attempts and so on, where people kill themselves, kill others, and they believe that they get some kind of a spiritual award for it, or understanding of what used to be called running amok, and seen as a culture-bound syndrome in Malaysia, when you had people who would run into the market with a dagger and they start killing people and they end up killed. And this phenomenon has now been transported to the industrial society. When people in colleges and McDonald's and so on suddenly there is somebody who kill a lot of people and they get killed. What is that phenomenon? Where does that come from? Not from nursing, not from toilet training, or just from family dynamics. It's all at much, much deeper perinatal and transpersonal roots. And then I would like to discuss in the next teleseminar what we call spiritual emergency, the idea that there are many episodes of holotropic states of consciousness that are spontaneous and are currently diagnosed as psychosis, and that these can be better understood as crises of spiritual opening or spiritual emergencies, and that we can work with them the same way we work with people in psychedelic sessions or in holotropic breath work. It's another very important topic. And then the next would be what we have learned about psychospiritual aspects of death and dying, both in psychology, people who are dying and approaching death that way, or people in some near-death situations where there's a sudden confrontation with death, and also that the psychospiritual death and rebirth process, as we see it in shamanism, in rites of passage, in the ancient mysteries, or in what I call technologies of the sacred, the spiritual practices developed by different great religions to give people direct spiritual experience. And finally, the last teleseminar would be focusing on the most far-out insights that people have that have to do with cosmology, with ontology, when people ask questions like, is this really just a material universe that created itself? Did it have intelligent, cosmic, creative principle? If there is something like the divine, like God, how are we related to it? Have we lived more than months? Why is evil in the world? So all these important philosophical, metaphysical issues that emerge when people do some responsible work with holotropic states.
It's really an amazing curriculum. I mean, Stan, you've synthesized a lifetime worth of work into these 7 modules, and I just want to say, from my perspective, this is some of the most groundbreaking, most paradigm expanding, most important information that any of us can learn about our own growth and development, and really a perspective on how we can evolve our world. So you get not only the 7 90-minute class sessions with Stan, but you also get recordings of every class session as well as PDF transcripts. That's word for every class session. So there's a lot of value just in the core work. This is the first time that all this body work has ever been taught in a distant learning format. So it's very exciting. Really makes it accessible across the world and to so many other people who haven't had the chance to, and blessing of really studying with Stan in person. So we're very excited about this. There's also a number of bonuses to help enhance things. There's one, excerpts from Stan's book, Modern Consciousness Research and the Understanding of Art. That's from the MAPS publications. It really gets into the visual depiction as well of some of this non-ordinary terrain. One of Stan's closest collaborators over the years, Richard Tarnas, philosopher and great writer and thinker, as well as a pioneer in archetypal astrology, is going to join Stan for a new discussion on the use of archetypal astrology in psychedelic therapy and holotropic breath work. We also have an article from Stan from the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology that's making it available. It's called Revision and Reenchantment of Psychology, Legacy of Half a Century of Consciousness Research. And if that's not enough, we have one special bonus that's available today only, which you kind of get behind. You get access to something that isn't available publicly. It's a documentary video called Stanislav Grof, researcher, author, teacher, and visionary, and that is special. We got special permission to be able to give that to you as part of that, and so it's only available when you sign up today by midnight. So to get all of this, it's a great package of offers. So you really get a whole cosmology, a whole a new understanding of psychology, practical methods for personal growth and transformation. You really get a lot with this program. I strongly encourage you to go for it if you are feeling at all called and at all intrigued by so much of what Stan has shared here today. And you also, remember, get the special bonus of the video documentary when you sign up today. So, Stan, what an exciting offer. We're really so pleased and delighted to be able to offer this to the Shift Network and to really open up these groundbreaking insights to people who are committed to transformation worldwide. So anything final about in your heart that you'd like to share with folks who are considering joining you for the Psychology of the Future course?
Well, just thank you very much for this opportunity. As I mentioned before, I know that you have very receptive audiences for your programs, and of course, your own understanding, is quite amazing. Makes a big difference who you talk to. I have met many experiences over the years, and appearing in different programs and being interviewed by different interviewers, and the results are very variable. So I'm really very appreciative for this combination that you are offering, and I hope that this will be useful, not just for people who would be inspired to pursue their own self-exploration, but also for people who might be, on the spiritual journey for a longer time, or they have done psychedelic experiences. I have met many people who said that this material helps them to get new insights or new integration of some of the things that they experience on their own when they did not have the roadmap, or they did not really quite know about territories that this exploration was taking them into.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Stan, for this time, and thank you for this amazing offering of the Future of Psychology program. And if you get a intuitive hit that you want to go forward with this, to do so today, because you'll get the extra whole documentary video on Stan when you do so, which is an exciting extra bonus to sign up today. So thank you all for joining, and thank you, Stan, for your pioneering work and your vast intellect and your wide open heart. You're really a great example for us all. So thank you, and have a beautiful rest of your day all. And goodbye, Stan.
Thank you again for having me.